and do roll and introductions. Um, do we need to call official roll, or can we just go around and say?
We can do either one. We don't have to do official roll. I do need to read the notice of electronic meeting, and I'm not sure, Taylor, if I do that before or after introductions.
I think if we did it now at the start, that would be great.
Okay, I'm just gonna read this. Notice of electronic meeting. This meeting of the Charlottesville Albemarle Regional Transit Authority is being held pursuant to Code of Virginia subsection C of section 2.2-3708.3, which allows a public body to hold all virtual public meetings. The meeting is being held via electronic video and audio means through Zoom online meetings and is accessible to the public. The method for holding this meeting shall not change unless a new meeting notice is provided. Should the electronic transmission fail, you may reach out to the TJPDC at lshannon@tjpdc.org. Notice has been provided to the public through notice at the TJPDC offices, to the media, website posting, and agenda. The meeting is being held pursuant to the remote electronic meeting participation and all virtual meeting policy as adopted by the CARTA board on May 28th, 2026. The meeting minutes will reflect that the meeting was held electronically by electronic communications and the type of electronic communication means by which the meeting was held.
Great, thank you so much. I guess we'll do a roll call introduction. Natalie
I,
Oshman, City of
oh,
Charlottesville. Oh, go ahead, Lucinda.
go ahead.
And I'm present.
Uh, Mike Pruitt, Albemarle County, also present.
Sally Duncan, Albemarle County, here.
Jen Fleischer, City of Charlottesville, here.
Okay, great. Does anyone have any announcements? All right, I'll just take this time to note that at the end of September, Loop de Ville is happening. So everybody mark your calendars. It is the Sunday, the 27th. It's the same day that the
Coolest
Chapel
t-shirt
Hill,
to have.
it is, and poster. And it's the same day that the Chapel Hill crowd arrives. So you got to finish your loop in time for the welcome reception. All right, that's all for announcements. So we can move on to acceptance of the agenda, which is an action item. So I'll entertain a motion and second.
I move that we approve
Or
the
second,
agenda.
whatever. So I second
All
Sally.
right, Sally motion, Jen second. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes, aye.
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 All right, great. Thanks so much. And then we have action item for the approval of the draft minutes from the July 23rd meeting. Motion and second from anyone, please.
Move to accept the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, sorry.
All right, none opposed. Great. And then matters from the public. Is there anyone?
If anyone from the public would like to speak, please use the little raise your hand thing on the Zoom. I think it's at the bottom of this. Yeah, it's at the bottom of the screen. And we will promote you and you can talk. There are members of the public on the meeting, but none of them are raising their hand to speak.
Okay, thank you so much. So then we will move on to the draft implementation plan discussion. Jen DeBrule? Batter up.
Jen.
Good evening.
Thanks.
You okay if I go ahead and share my screen?
Yeah.
Please, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let me just confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes.
Awesome.
Zoe has her hand raised.
All right, Zoe.
So
Go
Zoe,
ahead.
you can unmute. She lowered her hand. Oh, wait, Zoe, go ahead. We don't hear anything. She's back muted, so I guess she's okay.
Okay. So, so if you change your mind, just please feel free to raise your hand again. All right, back to you, Jen. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Coming back again this evening for, I've lost count of how many presentations. I think we're on 5 or 6 as we've walked through this implementation strategy project. Just a reminder, we started out with your regional transit vision plan and have used that to identify some service improvements, work through an initial prioritization. And our goal is to develop an implementation strategy that talks about cost for those services and some potential funding scenarios as well. I will say we are much closer to that final strategy tonight than we were last time. So with that, I want to talk quickly about, this was the last slide I left you with about a month ago, talking about what we had left to do. So over the last 3 or 4 weeks, we've done the things that were on the slide. So I told you we were going to revise the scenarios based on your input, refine the funding options, optimize the service assumptions. We had a public survey that was underway, and then we would come back at the end of August with a draft strategy for you to review. The reason I dropped this slide into tonight's deck in particular is because of that bold statement at the bottom. And that was, I left you with, I've given you some things to look at and react to, but pretty much everything's going to change because we were going to take what we heard at the July meeting and do a lot of refinement. And so I just want to start where we left off last time to say tonight's does look very different, but I think in a very positive way. And I think you'll be pleased with the progress that we've made over the last few weeks. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the strategy. So since I think it was July, I can't remember the date. It's been about a month. We have refined the 2030 scenario that we showed you last month to reflect working with the transit providers to reflect a level of service that is achievable. Really, we're at the end of 2026, so there's not a lot of runway between now and 2030. When you have to hire operators, you've got to acquire more fleet. There's not a whole lot of ramp up you can do in a 3-year period. So, your transit providers are already kind of on a trajectory to get to 2030, looking at those two things. So we've refined the 2030 scenario to really show what is the art of the possible over the next 3 years. At the same time, so that'll give you a short-term scenario. We're also giving you a longer-term kind of more visionary scenario to work with as well. We've also refined the strategies based on what we heard from you over the past few meetings, but really those kind of meaty policy questions that we talked about in July. So what we're bringing back to you tonight reflects that, I use the term blended prioritization, where we were using the prioritization that we started with that talked about intensity and footprint, and really looked at the geography of your services and provided a ranking. We've layered that in with kind of the cost effectiveness piece, heavier weight on those goals coming out of your vision plan, but we have included that piece that does look at the cost effectiveness. At the same time, we've refined our cost estimates now that we've really, kind of narrowed in on our service alternatives. We are able to refine the cost estimates and include costs for ADA paratransit where that's required. And so just kind of as a note, anywhere we're extending CAT's fixed route service to serve new areas, those complementary ADA paratransit services are required to, it's a federal requirement. It's part of the base service, but we want to make sure that we're reflecting that cost. So we've made that refinement. And I think probably one of the most consequential things that you'll see in the tables that I'm going to show you tonight is we're providing something that I'm calling an incremental cost. So as a region or as local governments, you have committed local funding right now to provide a level of service for fiscal year 27. In all of the previous scenarios that I've shown you, we've included total cost. So it assumes that everything, we're starting from zero, but we're not really starting from zero. We're starting from where you are right now in terms of service. So we've refined and we are giving you, we'll still give you total cost, but we're also going to give you incremental costs to show you the difference or the specific costs that are associated with the increased service that you're providing. So these updates have significantly revised the strategy and the recommendations. So I'm really excited to share that with you this evening. I'm not going to go through all these, but I dropped them in the deck. Again, there are a lot of terms, and I want to make sure that we're really clear on what the different columns on the charts mean and make sure that there's a common level of understanding since these materials get posted on the web page and they're out for public view. These definitions are the same ones that I walked through in detail with you last month. I will point out that I've added another key definition in bold, and that is this concept of incremental annualized cost. That is capturing that difference between your FY27 base level of service and this new level of service for 2030, and then also an aspirational level of service. So this evening and going forward, we're carrying two scenarios, and I've kind of touched on this already. We have our 2030 scenario, which is really a short-term scenario. So those are the incremental service improvements that are achievable based on, what the transit operators need in order to make those services happen. So that's operators and fleet needs. We've also, if you'll remember, last time we had kind of a combined line for the Route 5 and the US 29 North Connect. So in tonight's scenarios, you'll see that's actually broken into three pieces. There's the Route 5 with the extension to Walmart, the US 29 North Connect, and then separately, there is an incremental adjustment to expand the Route 5 North to Hollymead. We've also revised some of the assumptions around both Microcat and Jaunt link services. If you'll recall on the last presentation, there were some specific zones listed for both, but they kind of overlapped, and some of them weren't really, expansion zones that are on the table right now. So what we've done is kind of clean that up by putting a more generic service expansion for Microcat and service expansion for Jaunt into the scenario. And then again, I've mentioned incremental cost a couple of times. So that is our 2030 scenario. That's what you will see that looks the most different from what you've seen previously. The second scenario is more of the long-term view. So we're calling that kind of the aspirational scenario. It is a similar service level to what we presented in July. I will say with some refinements around, kind of getting things to a lot more of a logical level of service, and then also pulling out a couple of, in particular, a couple of jaunt routes that were really very, very early, not really on the table. And so we took those out just for clarity. And again, put that incremental cost in there.
Hey Jen, I'm gonna
Yeah.
pause you real quick and just check
Sure.
in. Does anyone have any questions so far? All right, I have a quick question.
Sure.
What does bundle mean when you're talking about bundling potential microcat and jaunt link expansions?
So instead of having a specific zone named, like there were a couple that were in the previous scenarios that were South Albemarle or Monticello. Now it says microcat expansion, jaunt link expansion. It takes the geography out of it simply because they were overlapping expansion um, for both of those systems, and they weren't really in alignment with, I think, current discussions around microcat and jaunt link. So you'll see in a second, it's much more of a generic recommendation for those services.
Okay, thank you. All
And please stop me. You guys are on a screen to the side, so I can't see you and see my slides at the same time. So just feel free to stop me at any point. All right, so let's jump into scenarios. These charts look very similar to what you saw last month, with a couple of changes. So I'll point out last month, and the numbers have changed as we've refined costs, but you saw a column last time of total annualized local cost. So just as a reminder, that is total cost for these particular alternatives and the frequency and the intensity that's outlined, and that's all on the placemat, and we can walk through that separately. But this captures the local share, the anticipated local share of both operating and capital for each of these routes. So that's the total cost. The new column is this incremental annualized local cost. And so this captures the difference between what you're committed to paying for today in your fiscal year 27 level of service and what level of service is anticipated by this particular scenario. Ridership, all of these are basically the same. We've done our ranking. And then over here on the right-hand side, we have the cumulative total cost, which is what we talked about last time. And then we have a cumulative incremental local cost, which just captures that plus up or that difference above what you're spending in to provide the level of service that you have in FY27. So I'm going to go to the summary slide, and then we can come back to this if we want to talk in more detail about the table. But I think last time I think we were all a little bit kind of caught on the how few service improvements we were pulling into a theoretical funding scenario. And I think what I want to start with tonight is looking at those same funding levels that we talked about last month. Our lower funding level is at about $12 million a year. The higher funding level is about $25 million a year. We've refined in a way that the funded scenario, whether it's tier 1 or tier 2, looks quite different than it did before. So we look at tier 1. We're able to, if we focus on incremental cost, assuming continuation of the fiscal year 27 local funding level and those services, you would be able to fund the incremental cost of all of those service options at this lower funding level. If we look at total cost, it would fund about the top 5 routes. And so I want to flip back to the other slide real quick, just to kind of show you where we are. So if we look at the incremental cost, our total, adding up all of the services that are shown based on the service assumptions, we get to $12 million for that cumulative cost. So you could fund the incremental cost for everything on the screen. So remember, your service intensity is less than what we talked about last month, because this is what's achievable between now and 2030. You're also accounting for the money that the region is already committing to transit service. And this shows you what a new revenue source or a new funding source, whatever that might be, could get you, and that you get really far with that tier 1 funding level. I'm going to pause there.
Yeah,
I've thrown
perfect.
a ton of stuff at you. So ready for questions.
Perfect. Great. Thank you so much. Anyone have any questions or would like any clarifications?
Yeah, I do. Um, the so the cumulative incremental local cost is a the the last row is actually the total that we would spend on all scenarios above it versus it's just the county link expansion cost.
Yes. So what this cumulative cost does is as you walk down the list, it's adding this incremental local cost. So it's the line above it plus the cost. So it's capturing a kind of a running total to
Okay,
get to the bottom. So if you want to
thank you.
look at the incremental cost, if you want to look at Albemarle County Link, that incremental cost is about $1 million, but the total is capturing everything above it and then adding that link cost to it to get to 12 million.
Got it. Thank you.
Good question. Very good question.
I will be honest, and I'd be curious what my other what are we, directors, commissioners? I don't know. What my other peers on this four-person body would think. I had been under the, I guess, misapprehension last month that we were talking about incremental cost, as in the difference in costs we currently deploy for these services or are prepared already in our plans to deploy for these services and what's being proposed. It seems very confusing that we would have been given anything other than the incremental cost previously.
And I will say that is on me, because we were kind of looking at things kind of in its own little bubble. And in the process of doing that, it's like, wait a second, we've got levels of service that we're already funding. So that not probably, I have confused you with that because we should have gotten you an incremental cost last time. But so that is completely on me as we have tried to kind of walk through different service levels and costs. We probably should have started with an incremental cost.
And I just want to be as now certain as I am on this. The incremental cost is also taking in, is it current levels of service or also projected, like planned on CAT improvements, right? Like CAT has planned on expansions to Route 2A, 2B for a while. That's been baked into their existing implementation plan. Are those expansions to 2A, 2B
So the
incorporated
expansion,
in, or like is that part of the incremental, or is that not part of the incremental?
so it's, and Garland can jump in and clarify. So all of the things that we're committed to for this current fiscal year, so implementation during fiscal year 27 are considered part of the base. But as CAT's plan has incremental growth each year between now and 2030, it's not capturing what was planned for 28, 29, and 30. Those would be
So
part of the incremental additional cost.
this is presented almost as in lieu of any existing like transformation planning that CAT is doing. Is that like
I
a
think
fair
outside of year
characterization?
one, we've got like a 4-year program, but of course we have to vote on it every year. And so the first year is being taken into account, but because the years 2, 3, and 4 have not officially been confirmed, those are not being taken into account. Is that correct, Jennifer?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Got it.
But Mike,
I think
I think you bring a good point up that, you know, the incremental is what this is showing and what you're interested in, but that begs the larger question of what do we want CARTA to do with funding? Do we want it to take over all funding or do we want it to just be supplemental? Not answered in this, but a good question to kind of keep in
that
mind.
was my next comment.
Yeah, Garland. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Thank you, but I just want to make sure I am clear. I thought the 2A, 2B in this scenario was the additional frequency. You have the 2A, 2B change is already baked in. This is to increase the frequency on them, so to make them much more frequent, so people can use the system better.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is both the existence of 2A, 2B and the improvement that we already
Now, this would
planning
be,
on?
this is assuming that 2A, 2B is already up and running, and this would be the incremental cost to get it to a 30-minute service, which means we have a 15-minute trunk.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm just going to stay on this clarifying thing just to really, really nail it home. So 2A, 2B. Right now today we're paying 2,514,000. When we get it to the 30-minute / 15-minute service, it'll be an additional $1,089 per year to keep that high level of service up, to serve up to 300,000 people a year.
So
Hang on,
okay.
Garland, you're muted.
Go ahead, Garland.
Yeah, I didn't want to step in them
I
I
was
think
just going to say
James was
that this is not your today cost. So there's
right.
not a column on here that says we're gonna help each other out tonight. There's not a column on here that says FY27. They're not budgeted kind of by route. This total that you see is the total for, if you want to stick with 2A, 2B, for the level of service that's envisioned in 2030 for 2A, 2B. The total cost of doing that is 2.5 million. The difference between, based on hours of operation, the difference between what you pay today and this total cost is the $1 million number. So you would have to, if you wanted to kind of back into something theoretically for today, it would be the total column minus the incremental column.
But I just want to clarify, we don't actually, today, this actual day of the year, we don't actually have 2A and 2B yet.
Correct. That's to be implemented later on during fiscal year 27.
The
February.
upcoming today.
Thank
February.
you.
February of 27.
Okay. Any other questions, clarifications at this time? Okay.
So for what it's worth, I mean, we can talk about the two columns, the total and incremental, but if there is a policy conversation about what CARTA's role is and what CARTA funds, you need to show both of these columns. Like, as we're thinking about putting together a final report, I think both of those things become important if that's part of the conversation. And so it is important to carry both of them forward and to kind of show them in parallel. I will say other regional funding that's been dedicated to transit via legislation has typically, I wouldn't say typically, they all have a maintenance of effort requirement. It varies by regional authority. So that may be something that you want to look at when you start to think about, which side of this you're kind of planning for and looking at.
And just to clarify, that means the kind of baseline operations.
Correct. So there's legislation that provides funding for the Potomac Rappahannock Transportation Commission in Northern Virginia. They have a maintenance of effort requirement that in order to get this kind of regional funding, that they continue to fund they continue to provide the same level of local funding that they did before the regional funding was enacted. Those vary each one of those regional or legislated funding sources has slightly different language, but it's just something to keep in mind.
And how strict are they in reviewing that effort?
I was asked to review it many times in a prior life, and I don't want to put Grant on the spot, but it is relatively difficult to track and pin down, but
so it's guidelines, essentially.
it's codified.
Yeah.
But
in practice. Okay. And
All
just to
right.
clarify,
Yeah.
Mr. Murphy posted in the chat, double checking that these are the local parts of what it costs to run the route, not state and federal dollars, which is correct.
Correct. Yes. So this assumes that we're just talking about the local share of operating costs and the local share of capital cost, and assumes that your federal and state participation continues at the same level. All right. So we'll jump into that longer term scenario. So these are the higher level of service that we talked about last time. So our numbers are higher. Same table, same kind of breakdown between total and incremental, same cumulative columns on the far right. I think the takeaway on this one, again, I didn't drop the lines on here because now we've got two different ways to look at it. But if you look at cumulative incremental cost, you get really far down the list. At $12 million, you get all the way down the list at 25 million, even at this higher level of service. So just to kind of summarize that table, the lower funding level, or the first tier at $12 million, about $12 million a year would fund the aspirational level of service for 12 routes, the top 12 routes based on incremental cost, would fund the top 5, looking just at total cost. And then looking kind of at that second tier, the higher funding level, you would be able to fund all of the routes for the aspirational level of service, looking at incremental cost, but just the top 11 based on total cost. And with that, I will pause again and answer any questions.
Mike had a question in the chat, just clarifying that these were only local costs.
Yes, these are only local costs. All right. Anything else? All right. So while we were working on scenarios, we also had a survey that was out for public input, really looking at kind of the broader questions about transit funding or transit prioritization in the region. I think there's a little bit of survey fatigue because both CAT and Jaunt have done onboard rider surveys this year. There was a lot of survey and public input on the vision plan, which is the basis for this. So, and it was the middle of the summer. So not the best time to get a lot of response. So I would say our response or our number of responses was fairly low, but we got some really clear themes that are not surprising. I think the best thing that best takeaway is, you know, people are very familiar with the transit service that is available in the region, particularly CAT, but also Jaunt. We clearly reached a community of respondents that use our systems. So 62% of the respondents have used CAT, a smaller percentage, 7% have used Jaunt. But some of the takeaways that we really got out of this that really reinforce what has gone into the prioritization are, you know, we asked a number of questions around what influences their transit use, and it really aligns with that conversation we had earlier about footprint and intensity. So if you what we heard from our regular transit users is what they want is more frequent service. That is the most important consideration for them in using the system. But if you look just at the population of non-users that responded to the survey, well, they want transit that's closer to their door. They want something that's close to where they are, where they want to go, and is easy to access. So very consistent with what you would expect from this type of survey, and really reinforces what we have done with the earlier prioritization work. So with that, we are scenario-wise really wrapping up a lot of data. So based on what the discussion we had last month, tonight's discussion, we will, fine tune these scenarios. We're working on and nearly finished with the technical report that talks about all of the technical background and the spreadsheet models and how they work. And that should go over to TJPDC in early September. We're looking forward to more input from the city and county and preparing a draft final report for your review in September or October. Still working on the timing of that.
Thanks. Can we pause here? I know I have a couple questions about the next steps. Others might too. When you say input from city and county, how is that input being presented or requested?
No,
Like, is that a city council thing? Is that a staff level thing? Who's providing that input?
I would say Lucinda or
Um,
do you want to answer that?
that's the supervisors, the board of supervisors and city council.
So we would get a presentation and then ask, and feedback would be provided in a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we are planning on bringing this to Board of Supervisors and City Council in the future session. We're still nailing down exactly which session that's going to be, but probably early October.
Okay, great, thanks. And then once the final report is drafted and we review it as the CARTA board, what happened? What's next after that? Is it for implementation? Is it for legislative requests? What do we do once we review it?
That's a really good question. So it's up to the jurisdiction, Charlottesville and Albemarle, if they want to make a legislative request for that. So this study is kind of setting you all up to do that. It's saying, how much it would cost and what you would do with the money. The next step would be to make a legislative request. Internally, the working group has been talking about like, what are we going to do in our next year? And that is open for discussion.
Okay.
I think to sorry, Chair.
Please go ahead.
I think I continue to have like maybe a mild frustration that I've had with this implementation study before it even started, right? Like kind of I was reminded earlier today of like Brian Pinkston's frustration of this study being the next step. It feels like a lot of what we're doing is not in like meaningfully dissimilar from the like 4-year transformation work that CAT does, except we have frankly county stakeholders involved in the discussion at the front end. Like that's the most significant change difference I see in this process and what I understand that y'all already do. To think through like what this actually means for us as an organization, I think we have to basically take whatever the final recommendation of the study is and say, okay, what does it mean for that cumulative amount to be administered entirely by CARTA? So I picture a universe where, sure, maybe CARTA, for reasons that have been articulated in a previous meeting, doesn't necessarily own every asset, but I do think it needs to be the institution that's making all the decisions and, potentially even acting as the pass through for all the money that relates to transit, which would mean we would want CARTA administering both the city and the county existing transit budgets, and whatever that difference is would be coming from either pure pure new revenue power or additional contributions from localities. Like I see this being like, okay, what's the difference? That's the amount that we need to be able to derive from a revenue authority minimum. We can derive more and reduce the locality contributions, but like that's what it creates a roadmap for.
It creates a goal, and then we have
Yeah.
to figure out how we want to reach that. And
To my
so,
first point, sorry.
oh, no. I'm just kind of trying to recap. So what we would need to do as we review this um, is make those decisions and maybe have some kind of like work session about I don't that's what we call it at the city when we have to kind of delve more in depth about what is the goal. What do we want to do with this information is something that feels weird to ask at this point, but is a good gut check on how we move forward with the information once we have it. Jen, Sally, any questions, thoughts?
No, you guys have kind of said everything I was wondering.
Yeah, I think that existential question about what are we doing is probably, we're back here again. And in the weeds question, which I'm sure is stated somewhere, and it's just me that's missed it, is looking at the recommended list. Is there built into this process where we actually, again, I'm thinking work session, dive into those specific recommendations, or those have all come from the compiled plans? I'm specifically thinking about MicroCat. It seems strange that that's on there. So I'm wondering if that's a whole separate thing that doesn't really apply to solve the problem that Mike and Natalie are talking about.
Right, like is there an opportunity for us to actually deep dive into the routes? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, not to second guess how the data got us there, but because some of them are still very surprising and are contributing to those numbers. But if that doesn't get us towards our goal of what we're trying to define, what we do with the information, I cannot see that being a separate examination. But I'm not sure when that
Or
happens.
is this point to get us a reasonable-ish number for which we can make a financial request, or set
Right.
various funding goals, and the actual specifics are like, we can fudge the edges of that, or like we keep putting off those in the weeds conversations, but
I feel like
they will have to happen at some point.
as far as like getting into the weeds of route alignments and things like that, I think that this study is just a larger picture to make a legislative ask. CARTA doesn't really have like any staff.
Right.
So once you get funding, then you can hire like an executive director or somebody who can kind of start taking things further. But like going in the weeds on routes is irrelevant until you get some money to spend.
It's totally, totally. But it's good to have a general plot of garden plans so that we know what to ask for. Ben, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to echo a little bit of what Lucinda just said about getting into the weeds. Like at the alignment level, we probably don't need to dive that far in. But if there are things that you're seeing in here that you feel like are conflicting with the goals of CARTA, that's something that we do need to know about so that we can make an adjustment on.
So like MicroCat being a priority, and or there's still not airport connection. Is that the kind of like not super deep in the weeds but lightly specific notes that are useful?
Yeah. Yeah, and if you have additional detail behind those notes of why they're not a goal, why they are not important to CARTA, that also helps us justify making changes.
Or are important. Yeah. Okay. Is that the kind of stuff you want like right this second, or like how do we have that conversation?
Well, while Jen's here, she can answer some questions. Like microcat was kind of a generalized thing because some of the plans had microcat in other areas, like expanding to some rural areas, and then it had like different things. So she just kind of put that in there as a general microcat thing. So I think it would be good to ask your questions about that now while we have Jen to answer questions.
Okay, before we do that, I'm gonna recognize Taylor, who's also got her hand up.
Thank you. I just also wanted to add and piggyback on the many piggybacks that we've already had. So this effort was also intended to show you all sort of the order of services in terms of the data, right? It's to give you like, here's what we see or what we could predict in terms of ridership. Here's what it would be for cost per rider. But similar to other funding initiatives in general, you all are still the board. And so when you think of things maybe in terms of like a smart scale system. Like there's a staff recommended funding scenario where they give them, here's what the data says, and here's the order that we would fund these based on that. But the CTB ultimately still has discretion, right? And so, like Ben said, this is the forum where if there's something on this list that gives you all heartburn, like this should be the forum for you all to be able to talk about that with one another and give us that feedback so that it informs the final document that comes before you.
Okay, great. I think that's a good perspective. So I know that those are the two things we just talked about are kind of the two things that I have in mind, which is um, we know that microcat is inherently unscalable and the most cost intensive per rider option. Something we talked about last week was if we could figure out how many people are actually using it for first mile, last mile versus door to door. And that I think is useful in framing how much of it is actually because we sell it as a first mile, last mile connection, but if it's not actually doing that, then that can inform other decisions that we have to make. And then the connection to the airport is something we've also talked about, and I don't know if some of these lines do that. I'm just not aware of that. Like, does the Standardsville connect stop at the airport on its way up or 29? Like, how are there any airport connections on these routes? And if not, how do we incorporate that into a regional request?
I would defer to Mike on stop at the airport. I don't know off the top of my head. We talked about with the Route 5, we've got the extension in there to Hollymead. You could show that going to the airport. But
That's Route 7.
Oh, 7. Sorry.
Yeah,
I'm getting
yeah.
my numbers wrong.
That's right. It's Route 7 extension. Route 7 goes to I'm sorry. Route 7 goes extension to Walmart, and then Route 5 is Hollymead. But in the original scenarios we had, it did go to the airport, but we backed off of that because there were some concerns about the airport's funding model about how they make their money based off of parking. So you would basically make it much more convenient for folks to get to the airport, but you'd potentially put a hole in their budget, their revenue budget, because you'd have to backfill it from the general fund from the city and the county. So I'm sorry.
And so, how do we? I mean, that's a useful summary of the issue with the airport, but how do we? I mean, that's a policy decision we have to determine if we have the political will to make. And so, when do we get a chance to have that more in-depth conversation and make that decision if we so choose? Is that a cat only thing? Is that a CARTA thing?
I I think I see a we have had some of the technical experts from the city and the county sitting in a room together and sweating it out on some of the details of certain issues of implementation so far. I don't think we've had the politicals from CARTA like truly sitting and sweating it out on big decisions. I I think if we look at the legislative ask as kind of a target, um, I, I think there's a bunch of big questions that we need to answer as CARTA. Um, and then I would frankly envision that then CARTA, once those are answered, would be the organization that actually has the institutional trust to make these what I would think of as smaller political decisions of route alignment and like route prioritization, right? Like I can sit here and on behalf of Albemarle County argue about why it's important that we continue to have a certain level of prioritization of microcat. But I think that feels to me slightly cart before the horse when we haven't decided, like, is CARTA ultimately going to be administering all transit funding for our region? And I think, like, I want to have that moment where we sit out and sweat that out and like answer those questions and go to our respective boards and say, these are the answers we've determined for this question. We're going to formulate this into a legislative ask once you bless this set of decisions. And I realize I've been yakking while Mike's had his hand up.
Thanks, Mike. Other Mike, Mr. Murphy.
No worries. I'll just say that today there are certain times of day and days of the week that county residents could book a ride to the airport. So that is possible now. The Standardsville route is going to come online actually around the change of the calendar year because it's a demonstration grant that was just
Oh,
funded.
great.
It is intended to bring in a connect style commuter route from Standardsville, Ruckersville down the 29 corridor and also capture things beyond Airport Road in Albemarle County, like UVA North Fork if they want, and some of the new rooftops in Albemarle County, perhaps. In addition to having in mind that it would be possible to stop at, let's say, AstraZeneca when that project is ready as well. Of course, that or the 29 North route could divert into the airport because we're already at the Target and Hollymead area with Connect 6 times a day or 8. And the question there is one that Garland raises. What's the intent of that route? Our type of service would be really with the intent only to move potential airport employees as opposed to people who are trying to be travelers.
I think the reason why some of these questions are that is also a good point is it employees or is it visitors? I I think we're not sure when we're supposed to bring these up or how we're supposed to talk about these. And so if it's not applicable immediately to the or directly to this prioritization study in order to get a legislative um, request underway, I think we should just note that we're wondering and we might want to plan a conversation, or we just have these thoughts and we don't want them to get lost and wonder, oh, why didn't we have this conversation yet? Um, so I don't know if that's a note that staff jot down, or if that's something that uh, we got two Jens and two Mikes that Jennifer DeBrule jots down. I'm not sure what is the appropriate way to make sure that this is a conversation that we do set aside time for at some point.
So if you don't mind, let me give you a thought on kind of this study's scope and wrapping it up. So the way that this study was scoped was based on looking at recommendations as they exist in current planning documents. So we don't have scope, and we've kind of danced around this, and we've done a little bit of this by going back and refining making a lot of the refinements that we did between the July presentation and this one. But in terms of analyzing things that aren't already in a current transit study, like we're getting down to like being done with our scope for this study. So we can make some refinements. We can make some notes around, the comments about, airport access and the right, the right place and definition for things like microcat. But I think if you want to get into like detail about where routes go or like changing those baseline assumptions, I think we're quickly running out of um, we're quickly running out of bandwidth to get that done. But back to the purpose of this study to inform a legislative ask, I will say in my experience, the kinds of detailed questions that you're contemplating tonight aren't going to come up in that legislative ask, because those are things at the end of the day, you're making the case for investment in transit in the region, and the specifics of that then come back to the region, should that legislative ask be successful, to then implement as the region sees fit. And so with a vision plan that's 4 years old, that we're using as the base for this study, I can tell you that this is a nice kind of concept for how you can prioritize and make that case. But when it gets to implementation, I think we've given you a foundation, but you're really going to have to take a much deeper and harder look with the input from your transit providers and from the local governments under the CARTA umbrella when you get to that point in time. And so I think as I think about how this kind of comes together for a final report, I think I can put some narrative around that to explain what it is and a little bit of what it isn't.
Great. Yeah, I think that's helpful to keep in mind the scope. There's no better word for that, of what this is supposed to do versus what we have on our minds, and we just don't want those questions to get lost. Okay, thanks. Any other questions on this slide before we move on to the last one, which is really just kind of a appendix? All right. Okay, so the the slide at the end was just kind of more descriptions about each of the links, just in case folks wanted to take a look at that. And then that was the let me scroll back up. That was the major presentation for this. So if there's any other points of one more chance for points of conversation or questions before we move on. Okay. If there's no other questions or comments, then thank you to Jennifer DeBrule for her effort here and for the update. And is there a motion to adjourn? Do we need a motion?
So
Yeah,
we
okay.
don't need a motion. You can make a motion, but the agenda having its contents exhausted is naturally at an end, and you can declare it adjourned. I read a whole thing about this on LinkedIn. Sorry.
Okay, it has an asterisk, and I don't wanna mess it up. I don't want to get in trouble for process violations. So, in an abundance of caution, we will note that the next meeting is September 24th, and can someone make a motion just in case, please?
So
Second.
All right. Thanks, gang. Have a good week. Thank you.
I vote aye. The motion.